Hi everyone, this is Julie Bruns. Welcome to the Peace and Possibilities podcast. I want you to thrive and be happy, peaceful, and content, no matter where you are on your journey. This podcast shares stories that will show you how it can be done, no matter what your circumstances. You'll be inspired and come away with a new spark of an idea. Never forget, anything is possible. New episodes are released every Wednesday. Subscribe, rate us, and leave us a review. This helps others find our content and get happier sooner. To possibility and beyond. Welcome to this week's episode of the Peace and Possibilities podcast, everyone. I am here today with my guest, Manuela. Manuela, say your name perfectly, first and last name for me.
Hi, Julie. So actually Manuela is a German name. So in German, it would be Manuela. But here, everyone has trouble pronouncing that. So I pronounce it in the more Spanish version, which would be Manuela.
Manuela Pauer. Is that how I say it?
That's right.
Okay, cool. So Manuela and I connected through a Women in Technology. So WITI is the acronym, WITI conference 3 or 4 years ago, maybe even probably more by this time. And I wanted to connect with her because I remember seeing her speak and realizing that she loved what she did. And I thought she'd be a great person to have a podcast today. So thanks for joining me.
Thank you for having me, Julie.
So I wanted to start off, my first question is always about your journey because whether people that are listening know you or not everyone understands or realizes where everyone came from as far as how they got to where they are now. So tell us what you're doing now, and if you started out in your career doing what you're doing now, or if it was a completely different version of it as to what role you're in today. Start with that.
Okay, sure. So right now I am a career and life happiness coach, and I have been doing that for over a decade now. But when I started out first in my career, I did not even have any idea about coaching at all. So that was definitely not the path that I started out on. That was definitely a journey for me.
Tell me what, like you started, so you're in school did you grow up in Germany or did you grow up around here in the United States?
So yes, I was born and grew up in Germany. My mother is Japanese and my father is Austrian, just for context. And growing up, of course, I had no idea about coaching. So growing up, if you had asked me in elementary school, what do you want to be when you grow up? I probably would have told you actress or something like that. That's
funny.
That's where my mind was at the time. And then I think after that, the focus was just on doing well in school. I did not have any specific career aspirations. Okay. And I think even choosing my major was more a process of elimination. I was looking at computer science, but then I took a programming course in high school and got so frustrated by the debugging process that I thought I could never do that career-wise, for example.
Oh, it's so funny.
Yeah.
That's so funny. So what did you pick to study when you first got into school?
Yeah, so I picked business because it seemed practical and interesting to me at the time. And most importantly, I think my parents approved of it. And that was a big thing for me because it was very important for my parents that I did something that was deemed successful. And so I was listening to a lot of that, I think, growing up and especially going to college. And so I became a business major. I went to UC Berkeley because I knew they had an undergraduate business program. And so I applied for that undergraduate business major and entered that program and actually enjoyed it. I thought that was really interesting. So when I graduated from Berkeley, I joined a strategy consulting firm, Bain & Company, because that seemed, again, something that was prestigious and also very interesting because we'd be helping companies grow their strategies. So that seemed
What kind of consulting company did you say? I didn't hear the word.
It was strategy consulting, consulting company. And the company was Bain & Company. Yeah.
So when I met you at the conference and heard you speak, were you working for this consulting company or were you already on your own as a coach?
I was already a coach. So I started out in strategy consulting and then joined a little startup, an internet startup, back in the day when startups were new and the internet was still new. and then joined AOL and ended up staying with AOL for almost 10 years, working my way up
Wow.
there in product management and then in strategic planning. And that
Wow.
was my first part of the career before I even got into coaching.
Cool. Okay. So now you're a coach. You said you've been doing this for about how long? 10 years?
Yeah, over 10 years now.
And when you started your business, did you have to do both, or did you just kind of make the leap and say, I'm going to get into this coaching. This is really, really, really where I want to be? Or was it a slow process and you kind of were doing both jobs at the same time for a while?
I was not doing both at the same time. What actually happened was when I was working at AOL, everything really looked great from the outside. It was a good job. It seemed interesting. I kept on getting promoted, so there was a career path. But on the inside, I was actually feeling very, very unhappy. And I couldn't figure out what was missing for me. And if I had known what else I wanted to do, I would have just quit and done that instead. But I could not figure out what I wanted to do instead. And so what I did is I quit to figure this out, because at work, I constantly got too busy with work. And whenever I was putting some time aside, I did not come to any conclusions of what I really wanted to do. So I would not recommend this to everyone. But what I did was actually I quit to do some soul searching and really figure this out for myself. And what I found in that journey was really, one of the key missing pieces was the sense of purpose and meaning.
Mm-hmm.
And I did not even know what my purpose was at the time. But I realized I wanted to have a much more direct, positive impact on people's lives. And that was the piece that was missing for me. I'd always tried to tie my job to purpose, right? The products we're building, they help people communicate with each other, which is great, right? But it just wasn't enough for me. And I did not know that doing something that was meaningful was so important to me at the time.
Yeah, I think because there's so many, growing up, no one says to you, what's so meaningful to you? I mean, now we talk about purpose all the time. It's like a regular word in life and in figuring out what we want to do with our jobs and our careers. But 10 years ago, there wasn't people asking those questions. What's your purpose? What do you think you're put on this planet for? I mean, it's been a slow going process. I'm so glad that it's more common now, but people didn't ask the question. Our parents definitely weren't asking the question. I know my parents weren't asking that question. It was more just about, what are you good at? And, or like you said, what do your parents approve of, or what do they want you to study? And what can you be successful at? You just go for that. And then when people do that, and then they come up empty, like, what's my problem? It's like, oh, it's not a problem. You just weren't asking the right questions all along,
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So, you have, so I admire what you did, that you just quit. I didn't know that you just took a leap and said, I'm going to try to figure this out. I think probably, I would have to guess, I don't know, but you probably figured out a lot quicker had you just kept working and try to figure out on the side. Like you said, things just keep getting in the way. You never focus or reflect on anything. And then all of a sudden, a year, 3 years, 5 years go by and you still haven't figured it out. So I admire that. I'm sure that was scary, but worth the risk, I bet.
Thank you. Yes, it was. It was actually a big decision and took me some time to come to that conclusion and actually follow through, because there was so much to give up in a sense, and a lot of was maybe more related to ego, right? Like I would have to give up my title. I would have to give up saying that I worked for this company that people recognized. I would have to give up a really good salary, all these things. And I had to kind of step by step, one by one, decide that what is more important? Is my happiness more important, or is this title more important? Is my happiness more important? Is the pay more important, right? So one by one, I would break it down and finally come to the realization, if I did not make a change, I would continue to do what I was doing. I would continue to be stuck. I would continue to be unhappy. And at some point, I just realized I cannot let this happen. I cannot be here 6 years from now and still be stuck in the same way, thinking the same things.
Yeah, that's the important. It's probably what you're coaching. If I had to guess your clients, you have to look into the future and say, where do you want to be? And if you're doing the exact same thing you've always done, you're going to get that saying what you've always gotten, which is more of the same. And if you don't make any changes, you can expect to be right there in 5 more years. And I think as we get older, I know for me, I turned 50 last year. And so just looking at what are the next 10, 15, 20 years going to look like? If I don't change anything, they're going to look exactly like they have for the last 10 or 20, which weren't so bad. But you said, what's really going to make an impact and make you feel purposeful every day and really want to get up and do your work. So that's awesome that you did that. And I wish more, I mean, like you said, you probably don't recommend it, but I kind of do a little recommend it. It's risky with responsibilities. You have to be able to pay your bills and feed the people that you're committed to feeding, of course, and have a place to live and stuff. But I think if more people made the leap with all of the right things in place, they'd find it quicker and then they can get there faster, which is the whole reason I'm doing this podcast. Anyways, so you can get more people out there doing it. Yeah.
Agreed. And you bring up a good point. It completely depends on your situation, right? The necessities that you need in order to live, you need to be able to pay for your food and for shelter and all those things. So that comes first. Yeah, you should never put that in jeopardy, I think. But once that is met, whether you have some savings, you have some backup, something, then I think it is worthwhile taking the risk and doing that. And luckily I was able to do that.
Definitely. So what do you think so you were saying you were climbing up the ladder at AOL and in your corporate career, and then now you've been a coach for 10 years. So obviously if you're still doing it 10 years later, you've been successful at it. What do you think made you successful early on in that role? Because you said, even though you didn't love it, you were getting promoted, or you liked the work, but you were getting promoted and being paid well. And now as a coach, you've been doing it for a long enough time to call yourself successful. What do you think made you successful early on and later through this coaching switch to this career?
Yeah, good question. I think even thinking back to college, right? Because that's when I first started planning for my career and, preparing for the first internship, for example. I've always done a lot of planning and preparation for everything. And I just started early enough, I think. Even in college, thinking ahead already, even when I was just a freshman, in order to get an internship, what do I need to do? Or how do I need to prepare? And starting that process. And then once you get the first internship, okay, what is the next internship I need in order to then get that job offer? And talking to people and getting the information and doing the research and so on. So I think that preparation and planning has been something I've always done and has stayed with me and has really helped me in early on as well as later in my career.
Yeah, I wonder, is that something that you were raised with, Manuela, or was it something that you just had in you already that you researched and were trying to plan and see what the next step was to get to the next goal? I'm wondering if that was innate or if your parents showed you how to do that.
I think that was innate. And even now, as I work with a lot of clients, I think some people naturally are more planners and they naturally plan more, and some people are just really good in the moment and they can really improvise. And those are two different skills that I find many people possess even when they're younger and are born, so to speak.
Yeah, and just having, I have two sons that are, 18 and 23, and I'm just thinking about them, and we raised them with similar values and upbringing and everything. I don't know if you have kids or not, but like every child's different. You could have 15 of them from the same two parents, and they're all going to be different and have different innate qualities. And it's interesting just to see the difference with them, what drives them, what motivates them, what recognition they like, what they, how curious each one of them is, and just to see, we taught them both the same things, but they have these innate qualities that are driving them one way or the other. It's fascinating to watch. And I'm always just curious because some people will come on the podcast and say, my parents always taught me this, or this is what I did, or my parents always said this to me. So in the back of my mind, I was always thinking that. And then there's people like you that are just like, nope, that was always just innately how I approach things. And so I just think it's fascinating. Just goes to show you, no matter how much work you put into your kids or trying to teach someone, even if you don't have any kids and you're helping someone, it's just, there's certain things you can't teach. People are just built a certain way.
Yeah, it's this balance, right? I think we have to recognize that everyone is innately their own person. They come with a certain personality and certain traits, etc. Now, that being said, of course, there are things that we can learn, right? We can continue to grow as a person. And so, for example, with this planning and improvising example, so because I'm such a planner, it's really hard for me to improvise. However, I do recognize that is a useful skill too. So, I've taken improv classes and so on in order to nurture that side. It will never come as naturally as to some people, but it's something that you can learn more about. And same thing for people who are not planners, right? They are planning
Yeah.
skills and so on. You can absolutely learn.
So that's interesting that you say that you can't improvise. Well, first of all, that's also admirable that you know that this was something you wanted to build on. So you took a class, and
Mm-hmm.
it never will be as innate as you want it to be, but now you can learn how to do it. But I find it even more interesting that you're not comfortable doing that, and you still took the leap to say, I'm going to go soul search and figure out exactly what I want. Because normally a planner and someone who
Mm-hmm.
wanted to see everything out in front of her or him would be really, really anxious about dropping everything and saying, forget it, I'm quitting this job and I'm going to figure it out.
Yes, no, it was very interesting. Well, of course, on top of everything else that happened during that period, and that was not planned, I was in a long-term relationship that actually ended during that time as well. So I got thrust into the situation where everything was open, where I did not know what the future would hold. And that was certainly not planned and not expected, but maybe the universe was telling me that, that was something that I needed to get comfortable with, especially when you pursue something new, right? Especially when you're out on your own, not just a career where you're getting paid a salary, but you're starting to build something, whether it's your own practice or something like that. You have to be comfortable with the unknown, and you can't plan everything.
Yes. The more you get comfortable with that, the easier it's going to be for you. Yes, that's true.
Yeah.
Okay, so tell me about advice. Like, what advice would you have for someone that's younger, searching for a meaningful career, or even someone in midlife saying, I know this is not my purpose, but I don't know what it is, and they either aren't ready to quit their job and they want to do some soul searching on the side, or what would you recommend to those people to find meaningful work?
So there are several steps here. And this is work I do with my clients as well, because many of them come to me saying that, I'm not happy in my career right now and what I'm doing, but I want to figure out, what would be my ideal career? What am I really meant to do? And so there are three key areas to look at. The research that I'm basing this on is this research done by Professor Tal Ben-Shahar. He is a professor at Harvard, and he actually teaches the most popular course at Harvard, which is a course on happiness. And he has written several books, including the book Happier.
I've heard of him, yes.
Yeah, and the research that I found so fascinating is he found that these three pillars were the important ones in determining whether your career feels more like a vocation. This is what I'm meant to do, rather than just a job, right, that I have to do.
Mm-hmm.
And the three pillars are your strengths, what is meaningful to you, and what you enjoy doing. So all three of those are important. And it's actually the intersection between these three that points to that sweet spot. And so the first advice would be to really focus in on each of those areas and pay attention to what your strengths are, number one, and really understanding your signature strengths.
Yes.
And then looking at also what you enjoy doing. Because the trap you can fall into is if you're good at something, people will give you feedback and say, oh, you're so good at that, you should be doing this, right? Oh, you're so good at writing, you should become a writer, for example.
Yes.
But just because you're good at it does not mean that you enjoy it. And that's why this enjoyment factor gets overlooked a lot of times, but is so critical and important. What are the different activities that you actually enjoy doing? And it could be things like writing, but it could be other things such as helping people grow. It could be things like coming up with new ideas. It could be analyzing data, right? It's different things for different people. And again, it's a whole list of things usually. So it's a unique combination of different things.
It's so important because, same for me. When I was picking a major at school, I kind of did what you did. And I'm like, okay, what looks good? And just kind of process of elimination, and what would my parents approve of? And what would I be successful at? And people would say to me, oh, well, you're so good at talking to people, you should be in sales. I'm like, oh, okay, I'll be in sales. Well, I hate selling,
Yes.
I hate selling. I got a marketing degree thinking, okay, that's a little bit softer of selling, but it's still in marketing, and I can be successful because I'm good at talking to people. And then I realized, like, my third year in, I don't like selling, number one. Number two, I don't care about money. I'm not motivated by earning money. I like to earn money, and I like to have money to pay my bills and go on vacations, but it doesn't motivate me. And no one ever asked me that question either. What motivates you? What do you I just thought, if I'm good with people, I can be good in sales. But if you want to be good in sales, you have to be competitive and be motivated by money and that drive, that drive to like get that I just want to help people. And I still could be good at sales and do those things, but no one had ever asked me those questions, nor had I thought at 19 years old to be asking myself those questions anyways. So
yes, absolutely.
I wasted 3 years, but I always say not wasted, because I ended up finishing that degree and then getting a degree in teaching. And then I combined my teaching degree with my business degree, and then I'll be a teacher in the corporate world. So it ended up being perfect,
Mm-hmm.
Collaboration and kind of marriage of those two things together. But I probably would have started at a completely different path if I just had some more guidance, like we're talking about right now,
Mm-hmm.
which is why exactly I'm doing this. Yeah.
Yes, and it's so important. So it's wonderful that you are doing it. And then the meaning piece that you mentioned, right? That's, I think, the hardest one for people to figure out. The enjoyment piece, a lot of people have a starting point, I think, in terms of what they enjoy doing. The only caveat there I would add is sometimes there might be other things out there that we enjoy doing, but we've never tried them before. So we actually do not know whether we might enjoy them or not.
Yeah.
So the encouragement would be try out different things and different activities, right? They don't have to be your career quite yet, but whether it's taking a course or trying out, picking up a new hobby and trying it just to see what it's like. I think it helps you get to know yourself better and understanding that.
Yeah, that's good advice.
Yeah, thank you. And then the meaning piece, that one really takes a little bit of introspection and maybe some guidance to figure out too. You can start by looking at, in your past life. So this could be previous jobs or other activities that you have done. What type of activities have provided you with a sense of meaning? But again, similarly, it might be that you have done those things already and therefore know that those were meaningful, but you might not have tried them yet, so you do not know what's meaningful. And sometimes it's also hard to distinguish between things that you feel should be meaningful in a way. So, for example, I think a lot of people could agree it's meaningful to end world hunger, for example, right? But there is a difference between something that's sort of universally meaningful and then meaningful to you in a much more personal sense.
Yeah.
And it might be based on your past experiences. It might be based on your interests, but it can get even more specific, because when you ask the question to many people, people will say things like, "Oh, it's meaningful to help people."
Yeah.
Right. And so good. And then help people in what way is the next question, right? So I think it's a combination of soul searching, trying out different things, talking to people who help ask you the right questions to kind of ferret out what is meaningful to you, and even get to the big question, right? What is your purpose in life?
Yeah. Yeah. And if you're asking what's meaningful to you, and then the follow-up question, I talked to a guest a couple of weeks ago, and it's like, what's meaningful to you? And then why? So it's meaningful to me personally to help people, but why? Why do I care about helping people? That's me. I need to put some more structure around that. It's too vague, and it doesn't point me in the right direction. It points me towards something, but not all the way. It doesn't get me all the way there. So it's like, why? What about that is important to you? What's the impact you want to have? Those kinds of things. Yeah. Exactly. That's cool. Okay, so my final question for you, is there anything you wish you had learned earlier in your life or your career? Think about that.
Yes, a lot of things probably. And some of them we have already talked about. Certainly from a career perspective, as you have pointed out too, it really helps knowing things like, what you really do enjoy doing, what gives you a sense of purpose and meaning earlier on in life, right? So really asking yourself those questions and finding the answers to that, because it can guide your career path, and frankly, even things outside of your career so much better if you know what that is. So I wish I had known that earlier on. And tied to that also is, I think, this definition of success that comes up a lot, because early on, I was tied to the definition of success that my parents had laid out, or maybe what society was saying a little bit, right? In terms of the kind of job that you should have and the type of company you should be working for, those kind of things. And the problem was I had never defined for myself what did I think my definition of success was. What did that look like? And once I defined that for myself, it looked different. It was a different list. But once I knew that, then I could really align my life with that and say, okay, according to my definition of success, am I leading a successful life?
I love
And,
that.
yeah, and I think that was really an important piece. So again, it's something that I work with people to figure out, because that's the key. Ultimately, without doing that, we'll just always follow something that's out there that other people put out there for us, but not really what we truly want in our life.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. I don't think any of my guests have ever said, like, what's your definition? Because if your definition is not to live in a $1 million house on the beach and have fancy cars, someone else would consider that successful, and you have that, and someone would look at you and say, what do you mean you're not happy? Look at all the success you've had. That's not the definition for you. It's never going to fulfill you. You're going after something that you shouldn't be going after,
Yes.
Yeah, I love that. I'm sure you share that with your clients. So that's phenomenal. And that's such an easy thing too. Well, I think maybe not so much for like younger, teenage kids, adolescents, but they could probably just say, oh, having a nice car would be successful, or making a good salary would be successful. But actually saying, like, if you looked at your life in 5 years and you were graduated from school and where would you be living? Where would you be working? What would you see around you? What would you be wearing every day? Things like that. Simple questions that would show you what success would look like for you. That would just go so far for these younger people that are just striving for just a good money-making job and thinking that that's going to be it, because they're going to be going down the same path that you and I went down, which is, I'll just go over this way and this will be fine. I'll get a great job and then I'll be successful. It's like, no. Yeah, that you might get that fast, but you'll get there and you'll wonder what's wrong with you, because you're not going to be happy.
Yeah, and you bring up this other important point about happiness. And again, I think we're lucky now that there's so much more conversation around happiness, and frankly, so much more research around happiness. We know a lot more than we used to about what actually creates and generates happiness.
Yeah.
And I think an important piece would be to understand for yourself what success is, right? And follow that instead of someone else's definition. That is one of the pieces. Another piece from this whole happiness research that has really stuck with me is this point that I think we're so taught in our society that reaching a particular goal will bring you happiness. So whether it's getting that coveted job, or graduating from college, or getting married, right? Whatever else it may be, that each of those milestones will provide you with this burst of happiness that will then stay with you. But the truth is, the happiness does not actually come from reaching a particular goal. The happiness comes from each step that you're working towards that goal, the fact that you enjoy the journey and acknowledge yourself each step of the way. It's actually that part that brings the happiness.
Yes.
And once you really understand and internalize and live that, it changes things, because otherwise we're constantly, right, looking for the next thing, right? What do I need to do now? What is my next goal? How do I reach it? And just focusing on accomplishing that goal. And then when we reach it, wondering why that happiness doesn't last. And if instead we could live our daily life towards, really recognizing what are the steps that day that we're taking towards our goal, and giving ourselves the credit for doing that, and making that process enjoyable, would actually do much more to increase our happiness.
I love that. So true. And I so wish that this was taught in adolescent, in junior highs and in high schools all over the world, because this is the kind of stuff that isn't taught. And hopefully you have great parents or guides, and not everyone does, of course. And even if you have great parents, they might not know this information. They have good intentions, but they wouldn't know any of this. And then so they go to college, they get a degree in something, they have a student loan, they have a job, they reach a milestone, and they're like, what's wrong? What's happening? And had they been asking these questions and been taught this mindset and these all of the stuff we've been talking about today, it just would just go so far to point them in the right direction, and they could just get happy sooner.
Yes, absolutely. And I've talked to some audiences that are younger, some as young as high school, some people in college, some people who just, are starting their career. And it's interesting because people come from different backgrounds, to your point, and have had different parenting. So there are a few people who actually have become aware and have been asked these questions. The majority of the people have not. And so this is all new to them. And so, planting those seeds early on so they can start thinking about that and realizing maybe there's something more is so important.
Yes. Yes. I so agree. Yes. Planting those seeds earlier for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you. This has been a very enlightening conversation. And I'm glad that you're doing the work you're doing, because the more people that are doing the type of work you're doing means we will have more people getting to those places sooner. And even if they get there later, they're getting there at least. And they're able to go out in the world and create all these awesome things and for other people, experiences for other people, because they know what brings them happiness and success and all these things. So thank you for the work you're doing. It's really, really important. And I wish it was just rampant in schools. I'd love that. Yeah.
Agreed. And thank you, Julie, because I love the fact that you're, sort of getting the word out there on this topic and why this is important and what different things are that you need to be thinking about in order to be happier. So thank you.
Thank you. So where can people find you if they want to contact you and work with you, and tell me about that?
Yes. Easiest place might be my website, which is pauercoaching.com. That's actually PAUER coaching.com. And I'm also on social media. So if you look up my name, Manuela Pauer, I'm under Pauer Coaching on Facebook and on Instagram as well.
Awesome. Well, thank you for your time today. And thank you for sharing, and best of luck with your business. And I know you helped people today, because that's what happens. Someone's going to take one thing you said and be like, I hadn't thought about it that way before. So I appreciate that. And I hope you have a wonderful day. Thank you.
Thank you. I would love that. You have a wonderful day as well.
Thanks, Manuela. Bye.
Thank you, Julie. Bye.
Thanks for listening. If you love this content, please rate us 5 stars on Apple Podcasts or whichever platform you found us on. You can get all my social media links in the description below. Help us keep the momentum going so that every person can live their lives happily, doing work they love.